Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for joining us for our second webinar for the month of Feb. Now, we thought it would be very relevant to talk a bit about tax and legal issues, given the ongoing news about the two-pot retirement system and the technicalities behind whether someone is deemed a resident or a non-resident. Now, I asked Janine Langenhoven from 91 to come and present to us today on these issues. Now, Janine joined 91 in 2011 as legal counsel. She was appointed as the principal officer of the 91 Retirement Fund from Feb 2012 to present. And prior to joining the firm, she was employed by Old Mutual PFA, where she served as a legal advisor. Now, Janine holds an LLB degree from the University of Stellenbosch and an LLM in tax, as well as a postgrad diploma in financial planning, an advanced postgrad diploma in financial planning, and a certificate in pension funds law. So she's definitely the right person for today's session. So Janine, without further ado, please take us through your slide pack this morning.
Thank you, Tanya, and morning, everyone. As Tanya mentioned, the topics that we will be taking a look at today is firstly the two-pot retirement system. I know you would have seen a lot of articles on that lately, but we will just do a recap just to see what exactly we know at this stage, what we don't know, where we are, and when all of this is becoming effective. Then also we will take a look at the offshore investment options available to your clients. And then we will take a look at what it means to go from being a South African resident to a non-resident. You may also have lots of clients now immigrating or considering immigration in the future. Okay, so firstly, the two-pot system, the two-component system. There are lots of different names for it. We know that there are definitely more than two pots. There is at least 4 pots that I can count. But maybe just to start with, let's just remind ourselves why the two-pot system is being implemented. So in South Africa, we know that there are a lot of people not saving sufficiently for retirement. When people resign or they lose their jobs, they may take all of their funds out of their retirement fund at that stage. And then when they start with a new employer again, they have to start from scratch. So that means by the time that they eventually retire, they have very little, if any, savings available, and they become dependent on the state. So the two-pot retirement system will ensure that the majority of a person's retirement funds will be locked away until the day that they finally retire. They won't be able to access it if they change employers or they lose their job. But at the same time, people will also be allowed access to a portion of the benefits. So that is in the case of an emergency. And that access will be available at any time, not only when you resign. We have even seen some people getting a divorce just in order to be able to access money in a retirement fund. So at the end of last year, we went through a bit of a stressful period. Here in November, at that stage, the effective date of the two-pot system was still going to be the 1st of March, 2024. The industry was really concerned because no one would be ready. In order to make all of the final changes to the company's various systems, they would need the final legislation. And I mean, to be able to amend the rules of the different retirement funds, you would also need the final legislation, which is now still not out. So at that stage, there was a proposal then to postpone the effective date from 2024 to 2025. We all thought it was pretty much a done deal. We were relieved, and a couple of days later, then there was an announcement that the Standing Committee on Finance rejected that proposal. They wanted to go ahead with the date of 2024. And the reason for that is because an expectation had been created, and there are a lot of people in the country waiting to be able to access the funds that they may now be able to access on the 1st of March. couple of days later, at least a compromise was then reached, and the new implementation date for now will be the 1st of September 2024. So although not ideal, at least that gives us a couple of months for the industry to get ready for these changes, and then also for SARS to get their system changes finalized. Okay, so the 2-pot system or the 4-pot system. So just a recap of what exactly this whole thing is going to look like. So firstly, whatever money the taxpayer has available in his retirement fund when all of this becomes effective on the 1st of September, that money will be protected, and the current rules as they apply today will continue to apply to it. So that means if the individual is in a pension or a provident fund and he resigns, for example, he will be able to take that full amount as a lump sum if he wants to, and it will be subject to the withdrawal tax tables. If the individual has a preservation fund and he still has the once-off withdrawal option available, he may still access that once-off withdrawal at any time. Normal retirement rules will apply in terms of the 1/3, 2/3 rule that we know today, and at that stage, the retirement tax table will be applicable to any lump sum taken. Okay, then the next pot is the savings pot. So after all of this becomes effective, all contributions at that stage will be split in two. So 1/3 of the contributions will go into the savings component and 2/3 will go into the retirement component. Now, with the savings component, when this becomes effective, there will be something called seed capital available. So that is seed as in the seed of a plant. So it will be the seed money available from which hopefully the rest of your investment will grow. So it's a portion of the vested component, a maximum of 10% of the value capped at 30,000 Rand will be transferred into the savings component, and that money will then be available after the 1st of September to take as a withdrawal. In terms of withdrawals from that savings component, people will be limited to a maximum of 1 withdrawal per year. Minimum amount that they can withdraw then is 2,000 Rand. If you don't use a withdrawal in any specific year, it doesn't roll forward. The next year, you will also only have 1 withdrawal for the year. Any money left in that pot when the person gets to retirement age, at that stage, you can either take it as a lump sum. If he does, it will be taxed in terms of the retirement tax table. Alternatively, he is able to transfer the full amount available or a portion of it to the retirement component. Now, the retirement component, that is obviously where 2/3 of the contributions are being invested. You will not be able to access the funds in this component before reaching retirement, unless you immigrate or you cease tax residency and you are out of the country for a continuous period of 3 years. So that money has to be used to purchase a compulsory annuity. So all retirement fund members will be subject to this new regime. However, Provident Fund members who were older than 55 on the 1st of March 2021, they will be excluded. However, if they want to, they can opt in to this 2-pot system. Then just the different transfers that will be possible. So an individual will be able to transfer within the fund between the different pots. So they can transfer from the savings component to the retirement component or the vested component to the retirement component, but you cannot transfer out of the retirement component. Interestingly, in terms of the draft legislation as it is currently written, one would have to apply for a tax directive for each of these transfers, even though there is no benefit actually accruing to the member at that stage. Then there will also be inter-fund transfers, so transferring your benefit from one retirement fund to another retirement fund. In order to do these transfers, one would actually have to apply in terms of the current draft legislation for 3 different tax directives. So you will apply for a tax directive to transfer the vested component in the old fund to the vested component in the new fund. You will also apply for a different tax directive to transfer the savings component from the one fund to the other fund. So we really hope that further changes are still made to the bill to ensure that at that stage only one tax directive needs to apply for. Also, just to note, currently in certain instances, you are able to split your benefit when you transfer. So, for example, if you resign, you may perhaps decide to transfer a portion of your benefit to an RA and a portion of your benefit to a preservation fund. In terms of the legislation, the draft legislation as it is currently written, you won't be able to do split transfers. You will only be able to transfer the full benefit with the 3 different pots to the new fund. Then the current issues, most of them are tax related. You will see the issues that we currently still need to resolve is the fact that when you transfer between the different funds, you need to apply for 3 different tax directives. The fact that if you are transferring from one component in a fund to another component in the same fund, you also have to apply for a tax directive. The industry has asked that that be reviewed. And the other question is obviously to ask what benefit a person would really get to be able to transfer from the different components prior to retirement. You would think that a person should be able to keep all of these options open, and for example, keep the funds available in his savings component for in case an emergency arises in the future, and then only at retirement he can choose whether he wants to take the full benefit or at that stage do a transfer of a portion of the benefit to his retirement component. The other issue that also still needs to be resolved is the tax that will apply to any withdrawals taken from the savings component. So in terms of legislation, it is the marginal tax rate of the individual that must be applied to that benefit. Obviously, the administrators of retirement funds, and especially if it's retail funds, they have got no idea what a person's marginal tax rate is and what other sources of income he may be receiving. So in order to determine that marginal tax rate, the funds will have to apply for a tax directive. Currently, SARS does not have a process for this type of tax directive, but they are working on it. We actually have a meeting with SARS later today to discuss the various options and the changes that they will be making. Then also, in order for this 2-pot system to become effective, changes to the Pension Funds Act also needs to be made. So we've only just seen the draft bill, and comments will now be submitted in response to that draft bill. And then poor FSCA. So once the legislation is finalized, all retirement funds will have to amend their rules to make provision for the different pots and the rules in relation to those pots. So the FSCA will be sitting with about 1,300 different sets of rule amendments that they will have to go through and approve. Obviously, before the rules of a specific fund the rule amendment is approved, that fund won't be able to offer the 2-fund system, the 2-pot system to anyone. Okay, so that's enough of the 2-pot system for now. let's look at the different offshore investment options that your clients will have available to them. Okay, so I've got 4 on the screen there. So the one is Rand denominated funds. So you would know that those are South African unit trust funds that invest in other funds or assets located in another country. The benefit of these Rand denominated funds is that they typically have lower minimum investment limits. So it's easier for South Africans to invest in them. And also South Africans don't have to use their foreign investment allowance when investing in these. Because the foreign investment allowance isn't utilized, this is actually a nice way for local trusts and miners to get a bit of offshore exposure if they want to. And then eventually, when a withdrawal is taken, those proceeds will pay out in South Africa in rands. The next way to get offshore exposure is to use an investment platform. So with an investment platform, it would actually be a direct offshore investment utilizing your foreign investment allowance. In many cases, individuals would be able to go through a local South African investment platform, which is actually quite nice. So with 91, for example, we've got 3 products that we offer. We have got the Global Life Portfolio, which is the sinking fund, which we offer through our Guernsey Life branch of 91 Assurance Limited. With the sinking fund, as you know, there can be quite a few benefits. For one, investors won't have to report any tax to SARS or pay any tax. 91 will take care of all of those things. And the investment will then be taxed in terms of the 5 funds approach. So it's not the individual being taxed, it will actually be the policyholder fund that is taxed. And those tax rates can actually be quite a bit lower than the tax rates that would be applicable to the individual if he invested directly. The next option that 91 has is the Global Investment Portfolio. With the Global Investment Portfolio, we make use of a nominee structure. The nominee is a local South African nominee company, which will then hold those investments on behalf of the investor. In that case, it is the investor who is responsible for reporting and paying taxes to SARS, but we will provide the relevant tax certificates. Then our new product is the International Investment Portfolio. It is similar to the Global Investment Portfolio. The only difference is that instead of utilizing a South African nominee company, there we are using a Guernsey nominee company to hold those funds on behalf of the end investor. Okay, then the other way to go offshore is with offshore providers. So to invest directly, your clients there just need to be aware that they will be responsible for all tax admin in respect of their investments, and they need to make sure that they are aware of any probate requirements that may apply, as well as possible additional inheritance taxes in the foreign jurisdiction, because obviously these products aren't developed or designed for South African investors. And then the last way to go offshore may be with an offshore trust. Now, an offshore trust, there can be a lot of advantages to having an offshore trust when doing offshore investments. So firstly, it may be a good way to avoid offshore probate. Also, to get protection against creditors, there may be estate planning benefits. But on the other hand, these trusts can sometimes be quite expensive to administer, and there may be additional tax consequences for any South African donors as well as beneficiaries where distributions are made. So it's really important that your clients get proper advice from you before deciding which route to go. Okay. Then the tax implications in respect of offshore investments. So just the different taxes that clients need to be aware of. So firstly, income tax. So where an investor is invested in an offshore investment, it's possible that there can be tax implications in the foreign jurisdiction as well as in South Africa. There's always important to look at the double taxation agreement between the two countries, if there is one, to determine which country has got the right to tax the specific income. Then also withholding tax may be levied on interest and dividends in the foreign country, and there may also be additional tax implications in South Africa. Now, foreign inheritance taxes, as we know, in South Africa, if a person passes away, estate duty will generally be payable in respect of his worldwide estate. But if you pass away holding offshore assets, there may also be foreign inheritance taxes applicable to those assets. So while South Africa has got about, I think I had a look earlier this morning, South Africa has got 79 double taxation agreements signed with various countries in respect of income tax, capital gains tax. But when it comes to estate duty and inheritance taxes, there are only a handful of agreements signed. And in addition to a couple of our neighbors, it's only really the USA and the UK where we have estate duty agreements signed. So where the investment is domiciled in any other country, there is the possibility that inheritance taxes may be payable on that side, as well as in South Africa in respect of the same taxes. So there also, it's quite important to take a look at the type of product that the individual is invested in. It is possible to get around those inheritance tax implications. So for example, if you are investing in Guernsey currently there is no inheritance taxes. In some instances also where you hold unit trusts, there may also be certain exemptions applicable. Then it's not tax, but something also to look at is offshore probate. So you may know that probate is the process whereby a foreign agent is appointed to deal with foreign assets and to wind up their estates. That grant of probate is then issued by a foreign court. So if probate is required, it can result in significant delays. It can result in additional cost. So it's really, wise to try and avoid probate wherever possible. And there again, it's important to take a look at the type of investment that your client is invested in, whether there's any way to try and avoid any probate being payable, being applicable. Okay, then just a couple of things to know with offshore investments. You would be aware that from last year, there is a new SARS process when taking funds offshore and applying for a PIN in respect of the person's foreign investment allowance. And that process is now called the Approval of International Transfers process, or AIT. Then also some recent exchange control changes. So these changes came through in 2022, but I think there's quite a couple of advisors and clients that's still not aware of it. So it used to be in the past that a South African resident was not permitted to place his foreign assets at the disposal of another South African resident. And also in instances where an individual does receive foreign assets, that those foreign assets would have to be declared to the Reserve Bank and repatriated. So the changes that came through in 2022 now allows residents who may have received a gift or a donation of foreign assets from a non-resident, as well as residents who received a gift or donation from other residents, to be able to retain those assets offshore without the need to obtain any SARB approval or even to declare it to SARB. They do have to declare it to SARS though. And then also residents who receive a foreign inheritance from the estate of a South African resident is now also able to retain those assets offshore without the requirement to get SARB approval or to submit a declaration to SARB. Okay, and then going from a SA resident to a non-resident. I think we have all seen over, well, yeah, it's been going for quite a while, the big exodus out of South Africa. So more and more people are leaving South Africa, or even becoming more fluid in terms of where they reside. And some people may decide to leave South Africa forever. Some may go overseas and see what life is like on that side before they decide to make their move permanent. But these people normally, yeah, a lot of them wouldn't know when they actually cease to be a South African tax resident. As we know, there's no longer a concept of immigration. So it is now referred to as becoming non-SA tax residents, and the process is no longer handled by the Reserve Bank, it's handled by SARS. So how do you determine if your client is a South African tax resident or a non-resident? Okay, so the first thing to look at, which is always the trump card that people also sometimes forget about, is the double taxation agreement. So before you apply any other tests, have a look at the double taxation agreements between South Africa and the country where the client now resides, and that may specify where that person is deemed to be tax resident. Only if there is no DTA, or if the DTA doesn't specify where the person will be regarded to be resident, do you move on to the following tests. So the first one there is the ordinarily resident test. So that is obviously where you look at which country would be the country where the person would return to from his wanderings, his principal place of business, these principal residence, where his home is, the place where he keeps his dog, the place where he has a gym membership, all of those things. So in order to determine whether a person is ordinarily resident in South Africa, there are quite a few factors that SARS will look at. So it's about your intention, but then you also look at the person's actions and the circumstances. If the person is then not ordinarily resident in terms of that test, then you move on to the physical presence test. Now, the physical presence test is where you count the number of days. So you look at the number of days that the individual has been in South Africa during the current year. Is it more than 91 days in total? Then you look at the 5 preceding years. Was he in South Africa for more than 91 days in each of those years? And then the 5 preceding years in total, was he in South Africa for more than 950 days? If he was, then he would still be regarded to be a South African tax resident, even though his intention may be to live in another country, or that his home is in another country. Then also, after applying these tests, if you need to determine if the person has now ceased to be South African tax resident, if he was tax resident in terms of the ordinarily resident test, then obviously when his intention changes, he will cease to be South African tax resident. And if he was tax resident due to the physical presence test, there, once he is outside of South Africa for a continuous period of 330 days, from the start of that period, he would be regarded to be a non-tax resident in South Africa. Okay, so now if you have determined that your client is in fact a non-SA tax resident, the following SARS process needs to be followed. So it is important that within 21 days of the change in status that the client actually informs SARS. So on SARS e-filing, there is a specific form that the client can complete, the registration amendments and verification form, and there the client can indicate that he ceased to be a South African tax resident on a specific date. Once that is then submitted to SARS, SARS will send a letter to the individual requesting various supporting documents. And depending on how that person ceased to be tax resident, whether it's in terms of a DTA or in terms of the physical presence test, depending on how he ceased to be tax resident, that will determine what documents SARS then requires. And once SARS accepts that this person has ceased to be SA tax resident, SARS will send a confirmation letter to the individual. So tax implications when a person becomes SA non-resident or non-tax residents. The first one there is exit tax. So this one is a bit of a hard pill to swallow. Yeah, an individual would be deemed to have disposed of his worldwide assets when he ceases to be SA tax resident and then be liable for CGT. The only exclusion there is really immovable property in South Africa and then another couple of small exclusions. So it is not an actual disposal, it is a deemed disposal. And it's basically the final way for SARS to make sure that they get their capital gains tax due before the person then becomes non-SA resident. As we know, as a non-SA resident, you will not be liable for CGT in South Africa, other than in respect of immovable property that you may still own here. Okay, so the person obviously needs to be aware that these taxes will be due, and also they need to ensure that they have sufficient liquidity to cover all of these taxes. Then as a non-resident, in the future, this person will then not be liable for CGT in South Africa, and he will only be liable for income tax in South Africa on the South African sourced income, so no longer in respect of his worldwide income. It is important for clients to inform SARS as soon as possible after becoming non-SA tax resident, and to actually pay those exit taxes if they are due. If they do not, SARS will levy penalties, and the situation can obviously become a lot worse and a lot more expensive.
Thank you so much, Janine, and thank you to 91 as well. Unfortunately, we don't have any time for questions today, but we will get in touch with Janine if you'd like us to. Some of the questions that came through we'll also pass on to her. And I think it's really interesting. Some of the key takeaways from today is that the imminent two-pot retirement system will most probably be going forward. It is an election year as well, so we are cognizant of that, although it is quite a time-sensitive situation, and it seems that the tax directives will be a huge topic of debate as well. It is also interesting how financial immigration is no longer a word in the vocabulary of SARS, and it's now deemed whether you are a resident or a non-resident, and we saw from the slide pack how you then do those tests to determine whether someone is now a non-resident. Talking about the pack, yes, we will make the pack available to everyone post this session, and we also upload this webinar onto our YouTube channel. Then also remember perhaps then that there's no probate on the 91 Global Sinking Fund products, but your platform consultant will be most probably the right person to ask about that, should you wish to make use of that for your clients to invest directly offshore and not have any of those estate issues afterwards. Until our next webinar, keep well. Goodbye.